with Our Voices today here on WOVU 95.9 FM. And I'm your host, TC Lewis. Talitha Kume is in the studio with us today.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, how are you? So happy to have you. So what an exciting first half we've had here on
Very
this show.
exciting.
Again, thank you so much to Queen Vida Amua, world-renowned celebrity chef and fashion designer, chef
Yes.
to the vegan chef to the stars, and
Awesome.
presidents and kings and
And
queens, and she's a
everybody.
queen herself.
Absolutely.
Yes, and today Monday must be for queens
I
because
think it is.
it's a copious amount of queens here at
Come on with the
WOVU.
vocabulary, okay?
Okay, we're going to increase that vocabulary retention in 2020. But yes, along with myself and Talitha Kume, Queen Eleni just had to step out. But we have another wonderful, beautiful Black queen here in the studio whose mission it is to help other Black queens or queens of all colors, I'm sure, but particularly those who are in the life of ministry, as wives, and so on. So I want to welcome to Our Voices today Sister Shirle Perkins. She is a speaker, author, Bible teacher, certified life and business coach whose desire, again, is to help, support, and encourage women who are married, engaged to, or who seek to marry men in church leadership. Shirle Perkins, welcome to Our Voices today.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we are definitely delighted to have you here with us. So, again, you are a motivational speaker, a life coach, a business coach, but I think number one, what I'm getting from the reading that I've done about you, you are a woman of God.
That is true.
Yeah.
Which I love.
Yes, yes.
So
Yes.
you first and foremost, I would say you're a woman of God, and you grew up in the church. You
Yes.
had some qualms about your involvement, therein, but your life path, took you back to where you were kind of trying to get away from a little bit.
I think that's how God works, doesn't it?
Yeah, so go
Yes.
ahead and elaborate and enlighten our listeners as to your journey to where you are today.
Well, I grew up a pastor's kid by way
Mm-hmm.
of my grandparents being the pastor and wife of the church I grew up in. And as with every pastor's family, you're on board for everything that has to be done. I've been an usher, secretary of the Sunday school, and at a young age, my mother discovered that myself and my sisters could sing. By the fact that around the breakfast table we were singing about some grits and we harmonized like we were from Motown.
Okay.
So my mother got on the phone and called everybody, and so from that point on, we were the choir.
Oh.
And just growing up, seeing my grandmother in ministry, it was something to admire, but it seemed like something that you just couldn't attain to. Looking at all the other pastors' wives, they were beautiful, beautiful hats and jewelry, and always on board. Anybody who's been in church
Mm-hmm.
will know that if you call on a welcome or something in the church, if nobody moves, the pastor's wife will move.
Okay.
So, that wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was just
Mm-hmm.
looking to have a career as a court reporter. So I attained that. I met my husband a few months after getting my first job as a court reporter.
Okay.
And we got married. Actually, like 4 or 6 months after 8 months after we met,
Oh,
we married.
wow.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. And this year we celebrated our 37th year. So just to let you know,
Talk
that
about when
does
you know,
work.
you
Wow.
know.
Yes. So that was a blessing, and I was just looking to live happily ever after, not in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
But God has His plans for you, and I would tell any woman that it's wonderful to plan, but make room in your life for God to do the planning because He
Yeah.
knows His work and He knows where He's taking you.
Amen.
But at that young age, I just didn't realize a lot of things. So um, when we married, we
Mm-hmm.
were at separate churches.
Right.
And because I was in the pastor's family, we had an agreement that I would stay with the family church, just to make sure that everything stayed intact.
Mm-hmm.
So you would think that things would stay that way, but God started, I don't know, rustling the nest, so to speak. And we ended up experiencing a spiritual type of separation.
Okay.
And that is where, if there's no accountability in the marriage partnership, you will drift away from what you initially set out to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he was drifting away from God and drifting away from the church. But I didn't realize that because I was so busy at the family church.
Right. Okay.
And so there was a gentleman here, and I'm sure most of the people here on the station will know who it was. Johnny Twyman had received his call as a minister. He opened up a church at the Your Alternative, I believe it was called at that time. And my husband, being friends with him, joined his church. And you could see a change in him. He was growing, and I said, "Oh, that's good. He's growing there, and I'm growing here. We could put that thing together." But he just was. It just wasn't God's plan for us to be separated.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the midst of that spiritual separation, we physically separated for a while,
Wow.
and we weren't sure that the marriage was going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But during that separation, we continued to date each other, getting to know each other all over again, and we made the commitment that he would stop some of his evening commitments. That was a spiritual separation we were having, where he had like 2 days of rehearsals, 3 days of bowling, 1 day of Bible class, and on Sunday we were separated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what caused a greater part of the separation.
Okay.
So we decided that in January of 1987, we were going to put this thing together and really work towards harmonizing this marriage and putting our family together and working together in the Lord. So, still not fully on board.
Mm-hmm.
I agreed that I
Now,
would attend the church.
right. So he
Mhm.
had taken on leadership in the church.
Yes, as a
Okay.
deacon.
As a deacon.
Yes.
And, tell us, explain to us why, again, you were just not um, ecstatic, about being back, in the life of leadership within the church. Because there are some people who would say, I would love to be, a pastor's wife. I would love to be a deacon's wife. I would love to be, heavily entrenched,
Yeah.
And even just socially, that's
Yes.
something people kind of can aspire to sometimes. Why for you was it such a drawback?
I don't know. I think being up close and personal already in ministry,
Mm-hmm.
growing up with that,
Mm-hmm.
it just wasn't something that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was very involved with the church, and by my grandfather being the pastor and my grandmother being the pastor's wife, during that time, they didn't really know how to write. So as they were speaking, I would write out their sermons and write out their talks. They would put it together. And so for every paper, I would have to hear it 4 times.
Yeah.
I'm writing it out. I have to
Yeah.
research it.
Okay.
Then when I hand it to them, they would read it back to me, and then I'd hear it when they delivered it. And then everybody in ministry knows about Monday morning is the highlights of what was said on Sunday. So,
Okay.
so I was very entrenched already in all of that, and I knew the responsibilities of it. And it's like, that's not really what I want.
Yeah.
I had made my own plans as a career woman,
Right.
so
right.
that's why.
That's right. So, fast forward, you and your husband, realize that, the separation, in your marriage was because you were spiritually separated.
It's true.
The two of you going to different churches,
Yes.
being involved separately in different activities. So you decided to come together,
Yes.
and you joined the church where he had become a deacon.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And as I was saying, I was on board, but I guess not fully in, So I attended the church, but I didn't join.
Okay.
And I just wanted to see how things were. And actually, I started growing in love with the church, growing in love with the pastor, Reverend Sister Twyman, and growing in love with the ministry. And it was just growing, and it was just a beautiful thing. So I was there maybe, I don't know, 8 months, 10 months before I joined.
Okay.
And I remember what happened. Sister Twyman put the chair out and said, it is time. And I said, well, you're right. So I joined and didn't look back and just fully engaged myself in that.
All right. And then so, with all of the challenges that you experienced just as, a child and a young person growing up in the church, and now you're married, your husband becomes a deacon, again, you've experienced a lot of challenges that come along with that. And so you, at some point, decided to make it your mission to help others or the women who are looking to, embark on the journey of the life of being, a pastor's wife, a minister's wife, heavily, again, entrenched in that lifestyle. So,
Yes.
what made you come to that to want to make that your mission, helping other women,
I
in
think
that
because
way?
I realized the fear and I guess the fears that women have when they're in ministry.
Mm,
I know we just had the conversation about a lot of women would love to be in ministry, but once they're in there, they realize the work involved in it. And
Yeah.
the big thing is the expectations.
mm-hmm,
You
Yeah.
know, I experienced those expectations being a pastor's kid.
Hmm.
And then I started seeing those expectations put on my own children, and that became a big problem.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
And so I realized that otherwise we're going through the same thing. And just to even continue in my story, we remained a deacon and a deacon's wife for 9 years. And then one night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, that's when my husband woke me up out of my sleep to tell me that he had been called into the ministry.
mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, I'm still trying to get my footing on being a deacon's wife. I know it's been
Wow.
9 years, but, I'm starting to feel more comfortable. And this is what I tell anyone: the moment that you are comfortable, that's when you
Hmm.
have to expect that God is about to do something in your life,
Isn't that
because
right?
you can't be comfortable.
It's so
Yeah.
true.
You have to always remain growing and always moving. And so after he told me he had been called into the ministry, he said, "Phew, I feel good about that thing," and went to sleep. I mean, actually started snoring. And I'm wide awake, and I had many restless nights after that. And I'm thinking, this is not what I wanted to do, and I'm just getting comfortable as a deacon. As a minister's wife, that's a promotion,
Mm-hmm.
and as a minister, so it means more responsibility. I'm like, oh no.
Mm-hmm.
But we, by the grace of God, we made it through that. So 10 years as a minister's wife. And then one day he came to me and said that the church here in Cleveland, Ohio was calling him to be a pastor. And I'm like, we're moving again?
Mm-hmm.
And I
So
think,
it sounds like it's kind of like being an army wife.
oh,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I
And can I
couldn't,
ask, were you
yes,
still working? Were you
still working.
working?
Yes,
Okay.
and I'm still working.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
So being full time and having children and ministry, that's a lot,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and
Did you ever feel like at some point like your life wasn't your own?
that's exactly.
Yeah,
And I
that's what I
think
was
that's why,
thinking.
yeah, and that's why I wanted to help other women, because you do feel like it's not your own.
Yeah.
And you recognize that it's his calling, but is this your calling?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember
That's tough.
as a deacon's wife, Sister Twyman saying that his call is your call. And I accepted that because that's what I'm being taught, and that's the what we teach here at the church. So I'm going to walk in line with that.
Mm-hmm.
But you can walk in line with it, but not fully
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
receive it
Mm-hmm.
or have it in your heart. And God just had to work with me until I could see that His calling was my calling.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about that, you're thinking about preaching. And it's like, okay, his calling is preaching. Mine is just to sit. You know, Mine is just a smile. And most of the pastors' wives that I grew up with as a child, um, they didn't really speak their minds a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And once you get out into a work field, you can't help but speak your mind a lot.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
I had to
Wheel that back a
wheel
little
that
Where,
bit.
back a
yeah,
bit.
Yeah.
to
And
split
that leads you,
personalities. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and that leads to resentment.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to you're not knowing exactly who you are or expressing in full truth who you
Right.
are.
Right.
Mm.
So that's one of the things that I really wanted to work with women with, because God was working with me. Um, the other thing, as being in ministry, the church community is a small community. And so anything that you discuss, you have it in your mind that all of your business would be out there and you don't really want to talk about it. And this is how many of the wives are. They don't talk about things, so you usually end up internalizing, and then you go into isolation. And what that means is that you're showing up physically, but you're not showing up fully who you are. And what God did, He led me to the Word of God. And I'm so grateful for that time. It sounds like such a bad time, but it was really a rewarding time, because it put me in the face of God. It also put me in His Word. And so I started looking for other leaders' wives in the Word of God and how they made it through. And so that's what led me to write this book, Pathway to Purpose. I looked at the life of Hannah, and she was a leader's wife. And in there, you'll see where she had a great need. Hers was she wasn't able to bear children, so it was an infertility problem. But in many of our lives, we have some other infertility problems, something that we want to show up, but we don't know how. And when we don't know how, we fight it. And what does fighting look like? If you look in her story, she stopped talking. She wept uncontrollably. She stopped eating. She was depressed. Exactly. And her husband even tried to bring her out of her depression by giving her more. And he said, I'm better to you than 10 sons. In other words, what more can I do?
Yeah.
But even though the man loves you, there's a spot that he just can't feel. And that's a
Yeah.
spiritual spot that only God can feel. And so Hannah realized that, and though she wept sore, one thing she kept doing was worshiping the Lord. And so I said, okay, that's what I need to do. In this isolation, learn how to worship Him so that He could be your number one.
Yeah.
And when He's your number one, then you have room in your life for your husband, you have room in your life for your children, you have room in your life for your congregation. And so as she sought the Lord in her prayer, she said, Lord, if you will grant me this thing, I'll give it back to you so that you can be glorified. And you'll find that when you give whatever it is you're hurting about, you give that to God, He will fill that need.
Yes.
But what's important for us is to stay true to our word. If we say we're going to give it back, then give it back. And so when God changed my heart, I'm almost in tears here.
You about to make me cry.
When God changes your heart, He makes room for you to be able to do His work.
Yes.
And I'm happy to be a pastor's wife. I'm happy to work in this congregation. And I've come to love the people more because I love God more. And that's where I am in life.
Amen to that.
Yes. So, thank you so much for sharing, your story with us. And something that is intriguing me, I'm looking at your website, which is ShirlePerkins.com.
Yes.
And Shirle is spelled Shirle. ShirlePerkins.com, the description of Pathway to Purpose, beginning the journey to your God-given identity. There's a sentence here that describes Hannah as a woman who refused to wear another person's message to define who she was. Now we just have a few, like 2 minutes left here in the show. Could you just explain what that means, as we go out today?
Yes. When I was talking about expectations, sometimes there are expectations you have in your own mind. Sometimes there are those that come on the outside, and people in the church will try to tell you who you should be, and you tend to embrace that, and you never get to know yourself. And in Hannah's story, she was the first of 2 wives. The second wife would try to label her as infertile, try to label her as barren, try to make her feel like she was less than. Even though her husband loved her and she was first, she felt less than. Also, when she went to the temple to pray, her lips moved, and the minister there thought that she was drunk. And so he was labeling her a different way, but she spoke in respect to him and said, "No, I'm not drunk. I'm just pouring out my heart to the Lord." And what's important is for you to know who you are. So in this book, I wrote about who you can know who you are. So who am I? Where do I fit? Where exactly is my call? And in your isolation, God will let you know exactly who you are and what He has called you to do and how it fits in with that partnership. So that's why I wrote that. You don't have to wear anybody else's label. Your label is being a daughter of the King, and that's all you need.
I love that.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Well,
Yeah.
we don't know who needed to hear that, but you
I
done heard
did.
it. Right. That's why we're sitting here, because I'm thinking like, me, me, me. But yeah, because this, your work and your book, your words, not just, don't just speak only to, women who are thinking about or who are already in a life of ministry. It speaks to everybody. Like, these are the things that you have said today. Anyone can take those jewels of wisdom and apply them to their life. I thank you so much
I'm so glad.
for sharing them with us, and also again for sharing your story. We can definitely check you out at ShirlePerkins.com. Are you on social media anywhere?
I am on social media. I have a Facebook site, Wives of Christian Leaders Accepting the Call. It's a
Okay.
private Facebook, so if they reach out to me and they want to get in there, I'll make sure they're in.
Okay, Wives of Christian Leaders Accepting the Call on
Yes.
Facebook. You, my sister, are definitely a gem. So
Yes.
Praise God.
thank you so much for delighting us with your presence here on the show today. Because I think all of this that happened today just like is in alignment with all of it. And you see, we have queens, we have knowing, learning to know who you are is like supremely important.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we could see it here and you sitting in front of us, and we definitely heard it on the line with Queen Vida
Vida, yeah.
Amua. She like you could hear her, and she know who she is from like a million miles away. You know what I'm
Absolutely. You
saying?
felt
So
the energy.
definitely that good energy of knowing who you are and exactly what you are purposed here to do, and that is what you, Sister Shirle Perkins, help many women to do. Thank you so much for joining us. We definitely have to have you back
More
to
than
go
welcome.
in deeper and just share some more and more and more and more and more.
I'd love that.
2020 is looking to be
I
like
think it's
that year
starting
of
off pretty
transformation.
good.
You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
yeah,
So,
definitely.
again, thank you to Eleni, Queen Vida, Sister Shirle Perkins. Thank you to Letha Kume. Oh, yeah, and also thank you to Nana Kwesi Ajari for joining us briefly and sharing about the year of return. You have been listening to Our Voices today here on WOVU 95.9 FM. Also streaming live from WOVU.org and screaming live. Shout out to Evelyn Malcolm on the WOVU mobile app. We